Healing into Life and Death by Stephen Levine. Chapter 4. Taking the Path of Healing. To take the path of healing is to directly participate in life, to enter the process with a light step and merciful awareness, which receives the moment as it is. To enter directly one's life means to tune to the moment-to-moment arising and disappearance of thought and feeling of experience itself. To directly experience itself is to be fully alive. Much of our life is an afterthought, a dreamy mist which obscures the moment just past. So much of our life is a reflection of what has just occurred rather than a direct participation in the unfolding moment. An example of how the path of merciful exploration heals so many levels was shared with us by Howard, whose right side had been badly mutilated by a landmine in Vietnam. After spending more than a year in Veterans Hospital, he told us he was still unable to heal completely. When we spoke of what seemed to stay, his final healing, to fully restore the use of his right leg and allow the open wounds to heal, he told us the day of the injury. He was on patrol with several close comrades. They were set upon by rocket and machine gun fire, running for cover. He stepped on a mine which blew him several feet across the rice paddy and left him a bloody rebel in the mud. He was bypassed by the enemy forces, which eventually wiped out my whole squad, he said. By being injured, he was the only one to survive. He felt that somehow his injury was connected with the death of the others. His profound guilt was the shame of the survivor, a condition very similar to that which had encountered in those who survived the Nazi death camps. Quote, "How can I be walking around here when they are all 6 feet under?" End quote. But the truth was that he wasn't walking around so easily. A noticeable limb and wince of pain accompanied most of his steps. His twisted limb and recognizable discomfort had become an integral part of his persona. Asking Howard about his pain one day, he laboriously unraveled a supportive elastic stocking on his leg to expose several ulcerated, quote, weeping sores. Quote, "They have been there for years. They never seem to heal." End quote. We suggested that his healing might be with the deep investigation of the shame the mind carried for having outlived his, quote, comrades in arms. We suggested he begin to pay close attention to whatever he felt when discomfort drew his attention to the leg, to listen closely for the messages, the teachings that his leg might offer. After a few weeks, he mentioned that he noticed that each time he changed the dressing on his open sores, he could almost, quote, "smell my buddies' bodies rotting in the jungle," end quote. After attending a few conscious living, conscious dying workshops and several counseling sessions, he was drawn to working daily with the forgiveness meditation. It was an optimal beginning to acknowledge the grief in his mind, body. Sensing that cultivating forgiveness was the ideal balance for his guilt and resentment. He began to sit quietly for 20 minutes a day and work with the forgiveness meditation, the great difficulty he had in the beginning, touching his pain with forgiveness, defined for him the blockages to his healing. Examining his, quote, decade of grief, he began to see how much of me was torn open and numb, end quote. He began to see that there was more to it than just, quote, this wrecked body, end quote. He began to notice when he was paying close attention to the pain in his leg, that it seemed to connect right up through his body to the pain he had for so long in his chest. Quote, I've had several EKGs in the last few years, but they always tell me there is nothing wrong with my heart. But now I think I understand. How I missed this connection all these years is beyond me, end quote. The grief work and the forgiveness meditation he was so deeply committed to was making the ache in his heart all the more obvious. Quote, it's like my leg is pulling on my heart. Because Howard lived so far away, we could see him only occasionally, but every week or so, he would call with some technical question about the forgiveness meditation. Quote, when I am sending my forgiveness into my leg and horribly bloody images arise, what should I do? Should the forgiveness be for the guys that blew me up? Will I ever be able to forgive something that causes me so much pain? Will it ever be able to forgive me? End quote. Over the weeks, one could feel that at the beginning it was the leg asking the questions, but as the process deepened, it seemed to be his heart calling out for its long-awaited healing. Within a few months, his calls were less regular, and his questions yet more penetrating. Quote, sometimes when I go to my heart to talk to my leg, there are no words there. There is just a feeling that connects the two. When this happens, there doesn't seem to be any pain in the leg. What should I focus on then? End quote. He was working as hard as he could to stay open through it all. At a workshop, perhaps 6 months after the last time we had heard from him, he came walking into the room with only the slightest limp. When I asked him what had happened, he said, quote, the wound stopped weeping. When I set my heart into my grief and to my leg, now I can stand on my own 2 feet. End quote. It was not so much that the pain had gone completely away as much as that it had changed. Quote, it feels like my injury is forgiven, and weird as it may sound, I think it has forgiven me as well. Anyhow, is it okay that I am alive now? Let's see what I can do with the rest of it. It is okay that I am alive now. End quote. The work of opening to his grief was a deep healing which may continue for years. But as he says, quote, my body is kind of catching up now. I was closed down for so long, so afraid to feel, that I guess it took all that pain to get my attention. This work of letting the healing in was very evident too in a therapist friend whose degenerative heart condition left him unable to climb stairs or continue his practice as a dance therapist. He told us that the work of opening, quote, my heart to my heart began one day sitting in front of a picture of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He began to breathe that glowing heart into his old decrepit one. He said that each breath drew in that compassion which he had so little of for himself. He drew the heart of Jesus directly into his own heart. Quote, I began to merge the Sacred Heart with my diseased heart, and it really got me high. End quote. What began as a 10-minute meditation over the months extended to several 20-minute periods each day. While trying to find the mercy to heal, the progress of his illness stopped. For 3 years, there has been no further degeneration of his heart. Quote, now I can walk up a flight of stairs again, and once in a while my heart will take off dancing, though my body is still a bit wearied by the twirl. For some, it takes months of pain and helplessness before they look deeper for their healing. For others, it seems it takes only a moment to comprehend the path on which their wholeness lies. One woman with cancer who had come to a 10-day conscious dying retreat came up to me on the 3rd day and said, quote, I'm going home to rest now. I only came to figure out what I needed to do next, and I got what I came for. End quote. In the 6 years since that event, her brain tumor had disappeared. When I last saw her, she approached me with a broad smile and said, no more cancer. When I asked her if it was completely gone, she replied, I don't know, but I am more here than ever. For some, this inkling of a way through a disease may come after a long period of great suffering and resistance, after feeling a failure for the difficulties illness brings until there is, quote, just no heart left in fighting it anymore, end quote. The heart often becomes exposed when resistance fall away, and even in the midst of pain, the sense of failure dissolves into a new possibility of aliveness. As Thomas Merton said, quote, true love and prayer are learned in the moment when prayer has become impossible and the heart has to turn to stone. This clearly was the case with May, whose 14-year-old son died in her arms from what she thought was a heavy cold. She had kept assuring her son after visiting doctors said he had, quote, just a little flu, end quote, that he could, quote, just sweat it out for himself, be a man about it, end quote. But he died. The guilt and self-doubt that ensued after his death tore her apart. Quote, for more than a year I went crazy till my heart just broke. I couldn't even go to the bathroom for myself. I would just lay there ruined. I was a complete wreck. I thought I would never feel okay again. I used to ask everyone I met if they ever knew anyone who did not recover from grief. I thought life was over. I had blown it. I had ruined everything. And it continued to get worse until I thought I was just going to disintegrate. After a year of contemplating suicide each day, I knew I had to, quote, shit or get off the pot, end quote. After many therapists' encouragement, I just let the pain in. I thought it would destroy me, and maybe it did, because in a way, I was reborn when I let the pain, the grief, just kill me, and it didn't. I saw this pain as the rest of my life, and I knew I just had to live it. From those days on, I have begun to trust the pain as well as the forgiveness, and I am reunited with my family, end quote. Most of us delay the healing that is to be done. We never ask the question, at what level is healing to be found? Until we discover cancer in our body or experience the death of a child or the loss of a much relied on position in society through old age, divorce, or chronic illness. There are many levels on which to explore the grief we hold in our aching body and painfully separate mind. Indeed, it may well be that not until a traumatic incident has occurred will we start to pay attention to life, at the level where healing is to be discovered and the subtle injuries are to be released. As I came to understand this more deeply, the way I worked with people in pain began to change. In the early years of sitting with those in great physical discomfort, I would notice at times that my heart would turn to prayer, interceding on their behalf to ask their pain might be diminished. But as time went on, I could see that I knew too little to know what was best for an individual. And then one day, when I sat down with someone in great bodily distress, I noticed that as I turned to whatever the divine might be to ask for some cerise, of their difficulties, something rose in me which disallowed that prayer. It was clearly inappropriate. Since then, I can only pray that someone might gain from the experience whatever wisdom and deep healing is available to them. I can no longer second-guess God as to the meaning, cause, or effect of illness, and I just trust, quote, don't know, to stay open to the process and recognize how deeply we heal when we bring our attention to life and all it entails. Our old friend Vivian awoke one morning to discover her teenage daughter had been murdered in the bedroom next to her. She could hardly forgive herself for not coming to her daughter's aid. Quote, how could I have not heard? How could I have not known that she needed me? End quote. It turned out that her daughter had not been asleep when she arrived home, but had been murdered much earlier that night, Yet, still the rational mind boiled over with its inability to control death or protect a loved one. For the first month, she said it was nearly impossible for her to believe that she slept the night through with her daughter strangled in the next bedroom. Her body began to ache, and various old physical ailments reoccurred. She said, "I am sick to death with the way things are here." End quote. She said she would do anything to bring her daughter back. Her body and mind showed the strain, until one day, working with the grief meditation, she acknowledged, quote, "Things will never be the same." End quote. She allowed the enormous pain of this enormous truth to sink into her heart and began to let the healing in. Instead of constantly struggling with the images of her strangled daughter, she let them sweep over her and cried and screamed and laughed and talked and talked and talked to cried. I was about to read that line again. Talked to her dead daughter and finally slept. Instead of struggling against what was, she began to open to things as they were, allowing the pain to peel levels of holding from the heart, burning through a lifetime of separation and fear to leave her nearly translucent in her compassion and healing. And although she says today that she recognizes that her daughter can never return, she usually adds, quote, "but she has never become so close either." End quote. These levels of healing and the various insights which inhabit them were never more evident than with our friend Bob, who suffered lingering pain from multiple fractures sustained during a motorcycle accident some years before. After years of working with the various medical models and analgesics to quell the pain and calm the body's intense reaction to acute discomfort, he told us, quote, "Recently I got the opportunity to realize an old dream. I was given some land and enough lumber to build my own home, but I was uncomfortable at times and thought I would just have to pass it by. But I really thought about it a lot. I asked myself how I could do it. And something in me said, just remember that when you think of God, your back doesn't hurt so much." End quote. The only way he could build the home he had always wanted back in the woods was to constantly sing to God. It did the trick. Now he lives in a temple instead of just a house, and God sings to him. His back still hurts every once in a while, but when it does, it just reminds him to sing an octave deeper. Perhaps when we speak of the enlightened one, the saints, the Illuminati, all we are referring to is the healed ones, those whose mind has sunk deeply into the heart, those who have discovered the one out of the many arise, the non-fragmented, the whole. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, speaks of the few who survived the horror of the concentration camps as those who served others. The doctors, the nuns, the priests, the rabbis, the mothering and fathering caregivers. They survived because they had reason to live, love itself, healing itself. They went beyond the illness that so often devastated the body. Even in the environment in which they lost all control, all dignity, and its imagined autonomy, they saw that the gift given, the gifted, they saw that the gift given, the gifted, is love. They knew that love is the only gift worth giving, that our care for others is our care for ourselves, a deep honoring of the honoring of the being we all share. The path of healing is a process of opening our heart to the holdings of the past while maintaining a keen awareness of the present. It is coming home, a return to the living moment. But because there's so much more to us than just mind, body, because our original nature is without boundary, its edgelessness cannot be described. It can only be participated in. Although we speak in terms of, quote, taking the path of healing, that is certainly not the only way to put it. The great Sao shaman Black Elk speaks of walking in a sacred manner. To walk in a sacred manner is to make an art of life, to attend to each moment as though it were the last, to take each step as though it were the first, to breathe love and awareness into this tiny body, entering the greater body we all share, seeing that each step must be taken lightly, not with force, not creating more self, becoming more of a doer, more of a separate identity which draws suffering upon itself. To walk in a sacred manner is to let go of our suffering and allow the scintillating thusness of each moment to nurture and direct the next step. When we walk in a sacred manner, nothing throws us off balance, for nothing is identified with as self, as the walker, but instead all is experienced as the sacred, as process unfolding in the divine moment provided for our healing. An open body, an open mind, an open heart. The possibilities are endless. Healing is to be found everywhere. Each step so precious. Each step a new healing. Are you looking for me? I am in the next seat. My shoulder is against yours. You will not find me in the stupas, not in Indian shrine rooms, nor in synagogues, nor in cathedrals, not in masses, nor kirtans, not in legs winding around your own neck, nor in eating nothing but vegetables. When you really look for me, you will see me instantly. You will find me in the tiniest house of time. Kabir says, "Student, tell me, what is God?" It is the breath inside the breath. Kabir.